The most delicious, most expensive quality wines are the ones in which their grapes had to grow in the harshest soil. Their roots had to grow deep into difficult terrain through the layers of the earth. Wherever Saturn resides in your chart, whatever area of life it's in for you, this is exactly what Saturn is doing for you. Those roots not only create nourishment and richness in you and your life, but they also create an everlasting strength that stands the test of time. Today, we're uncovering the area of life that you have Saturn in. That way you know exactly how to become a master in that area of life and build something successfully that lasts forever. Hola, my beautiful dreamers. Welcome back or welcome to my channel. My name is Marisa LaBlue, and I merge cosmic advice with everything self-development so we can become our dream selves every day. If that sounds like something you're interested in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. That way you don't miss future videos like this one. And you can follow me on other social media platforms for more background, astrology, and spirituality content. Last week, we destigmatized Saturn as the malefic planet by exploring your Saturn sign. So if you haven't watched that yet, be sure that you watch that before or after this video to have a deeper understanding of your personal Saturn. But today we're going to uncover the Saturn house placement. The houses are a much more mysterious placement in astrology for many, but they are the most personal to you. That is why it is vital to know your house placement if you can. We can't always, because you do need to know your exact birth time to know your houses. However, if you can uncover that information, it is the most personal information to your birth chart because nobody's houses lie in the same exact placement. They are much more specific to you. The difference between your Saturn sign and your Saturn house is that your Saturn sign more so tells you about certain personal inherent qualities that you may experience and what you may aspire to be, or what you may experience as internal difficulty as a person, certain challenges that challenged you as a person on a more trait-driven level. When it comes to Saturn in the houses represent areas of life. So these are the areas of life where you're going to deal with Saturn the most. Every house is representative of a different sector of life. It could be partnerships, it could be spirituality. So exploring the house in which Saturn resides and not just the sign in which it resides will reveal more to you about the area of life where Saturn's challenges are going to show up for you. But not just where the challenges will show up, but the area of life that you are meant to become a guide, a leader, a mentor, a master of. And by doing so, you build the strong roots through the test of time to then build something in that area of life that forever stands the test of time. Because Saturn is the planet of time related to the god Kronos. And if you don't know the Kronos mythology, I highly recommend you look it up to have a deeper understanding of Saturn itself. But Saturn represents time, how we use it, what we experience with time, and what we build when it comes to long-lasting foundations rather than short-term gratification. It's common to wonder why a certain area of life is so hard for you. Why do I have to have Saturn here? Why can't I just have a successful partnership? Why does Saturn have to ruin it for me? Why does everyone else have it easier? Why does my friend have an easier time with relationships than I do? Well, if Saturn is residing in your house of relationships, then that is something you're meant to face. But your friend, your family, whoever you're envious of, they all have their own Saturn to deal with. Everybody has their own karmic lessons when it comes to Saturn placements. No one is escaping it. Everyone just has a different placement, so they experience Saturn in different areas of life. However, Saturn does delay, yes, because by delaying gratification, you always build something that has a much deeper, stronger, everlasting foundation. Anything in this world built on quick fixes never lasts, and it's never good for us. You can look at just about any example of that, and you know that it's true. So even though the house Saturn is in is where you may feel the most restricted, you may experience the most fear and insecurity, it's something you might avoid or reject entirely. It's also where you're meant to build the strongest foundation and become an authority in whatever it is. And when you lean into that and lean into the challenges and decide to take it head on rather than run from it, you will then reap the rewards as time goes on. If you're experiencing your Saturn return and are curious about what that means because Saturn just moved into Aries, then I do have a video on the Saturn return that you can also go watch after you watch this video. Saturn in the first house. When you have Saturn in the first house, you are meant to become an authority in your identity. Your identity is the lasting foundation that you are meant to become a master of in this lifetime. Let me explain. The first house is the house of identity. It signifies the first moment we come into the world in childbirth, and it is ruled by Aries and Mars. Because of that, the first house deals with themes of our self-identity. The moment we come into the world, who are we instinctively? I know when you're a baby, you maybe can't really tell a baby's personality, but that's not the point. The point is, it's unfiltered you. It represents whoever you are at your core, the core that you were born with. That is why it marks the first moment of the zodiac wheel and therefore the first moment of our step in this lifetime outside of the womb. However, just like I explained in the Saturn signs video, wherever Saturn resides in your chart is an area where you probably reject the nature of that area. So when it comes to having Saturn in the first house, you reject that core identity that you were born with, or you may have become so removed from what it even is. This could stem from early childhood. Saturn has a lot to do with karmic cycles and what karmic lesson you're dealing with. Because of that, Saturn tends to put you in a loop where you have to somehow learn how to embrace the nature of that house through the challenges you experience, rejecting the nature of the house. So maybe in your childhood, there was some reason that you rejected your core identity. It could have been that you were drowned out by the people around you. You were considered too much, you were considered too loud, or perhaps you were forced to mature at a rapid rate because the first house very much again deals with the core identity of us as a child, us as a newborn baby, unfiltered and non-jaded. So what may have happened is early in life, you may have experienced something that made you become very jaded very quickly, and you lost that initial spark of life and that initial core identity of who you are, because you had to sacrifice it or you felt you needed to sacrifice it for something demanding your maturity and the responsible side of you to develop much quicker than it should have. Because of that, you may face deep self-criticism and a constant anxiety about how others are perceiving you. Because the first house is a house of identity, it has a lot to do with outwards perception. Because the first house is also where we have our rising sign. And our rising sign is not just the lens through which we see the world, but it's the lens through which the world also perceives us. So it has everything to do with perception. Because of that, there's a lot of anxiety here if you have Saturn in the first house around how you're being perceived. So you may experience a deep self-criticism because you never feel like you're being good enough. You'll never be accepted as you are. You don't even know who you are. So you tend to let the outward world imprint on you, which creates a difficulty feeling comfortable in your own skin and who you are. You experience a detachment and almost a removal from that. And you may even disassociate from your core identity, your soul, in order to feel a sense of safety, like you're protecting it, because to be perceived is to be seen in a way that denotes vulnerability. So with Saturn being here, finding who you are, and not even just finding who you are, but more so reconnecting to the core of your identity, who you were before everything potentially jaded you, is going to be the slow journey of your lifetime, especially before your first Saturn return. The first Saturn return happens around ages 27 to 30. Again, I have a video on that you should definitely go watch. That will be linked below. But the Saturn return is usually when we create our first shift, where we start to recognize and realize the lesson that Saturn is teaching us. But prior to the first Saturn return especially, trying to figure out who you are and returning to who you are is going to be the slow journey that you experience. And you may experience a lot of challenges leading up to the first Saturn return that really try to remove you from who you are. and they try to put you in positions that expose who you are or encourage you to lean into that, but you shy away from it, mainly because you'll hesitate to initiate anything that you want. Maybe you want to try out for a team in school. Maybe you want to dress a certain way. Maybe you want to go on a certain career path, but you have drowned out what you want for the sake of what you think you should do or taking on a different identity because you don't have the confidence in your own. You don't have the faith that your own is good enough. So you don't initiate for the longest time the things that you really want, and you don't live true to yourself. But it's going to be a slow journey for you to start to not only recognize your inner soul once again, but dare to be recognized for who you really are by everybody else. But the magic in that is that you're building a much stronger, more intimate connection to who you are because it is taking time for you to uncover that. Plus, you have this innate sense of maturity and responsibility born from Saturn being in your first house that gives you the grit and gives you the maturity and gives you the responsible nature to actually turn your identity into something fruitful. The recognition that you experience that comes later in life will truly be for who you are in whatever avenue that is for you specifically. For the sake of this example, let's just use the example of a content creator or celebrity. You won't be known for anything fake, something that you did just to get quick views. You had to reveal your authentic self, and you had to dare to be recognized and had the courage to be recognized in that authenticity, which then led you to the most fruitful content creation or celebrity career out of anyone else, even though it may have taken you longer than someone who blew up at 18 years old just to have a whole bunch of followers that doesn't like them a few years down the line, and they lose everything because it wasn't built on something long-lasting and authentic. So some tips for how to begin healing in this area of life and uncovering the mastery of Saturn in the first house is to stop tying your work ethic to external validation. Release your toxic sense of hyper independence. Reconnect to your body through gentle practices. Take initiative even when you're afraid, because by doing that, you will repeatedly start building and reinforcing your sense of confidence and faith in yourself. And true power is earned through self-trust, not perfection. The first house is all about daring to make the first move, not ruminating on it for years to come. Saturn in the second house. With Saturn in the second, your ultimate potential is to build immense internal and external wealth through recognizing your true sense of self-worth. The second house is popularly known as the house of possessions. But more than this, it's the house that kind of tells us how we earn income, our relationship with money and finance, our values, and our sense of self-worth. Because the second house is ruled by Venus and the earth sign Taurus, this house does have a large material connection. However, this house still lies below the axis on the zodiac wheel, that is the internal and external axis. Houses 1 through 6 deal much more with the internal. So like the first house is kind of signifying our step into the world outside of the womb, the second house is still us building what is going to create us as an adult. So it's still heavily related to the internal state of our soul and how we are brought up in childhood. So the second house is connected to our relationship to adult things like finance, but it's more so what values and what sense of self-worth we have that creates that relationship with the material things such as money. The way we treat money is not just born out of thin air. It comes from somewhere, often from our childhood and the values that we were raised with. So having Saturn in the second house means that this area of life may be where you experience some of the most strife, but where you are being built to have the most long-lasting internal and external wealth, because we're not just dealing with having lots of money. I'm not saying that if you have Saturn in the second, you're meant to be a billionaire, a millionaire, or whatever. I am saying, though, that you're meant to have wealth on all levels. Wealth that feels fulfilling to you. Whatever wealth is defined as by you, you are meant to have it, but it is not going to be without the struggles of Saturn here, because Saturn wants it to be long-lasting for you. And because Saturn deals with karmic lessons and loops, we definitely see a lot of the themes showing up in childhood, especially with houses 1 through 6, With the second house specifically, you may have had some type of scarcity mindset built in your childhood around finances. Perhaps you saw your parents struggle. Perhaps you yourself were forced to mature early because you had to handle family finances and you saw what it does. Or maybe you were actually exposed to wealth early on and it ruined your idea of money because to you, you associated money and career and financial success with the absence of parents, with the reason your parents got divorced, with something that came between your siblings or whatever the case may be. Because of this, you may have a fearful relationship to money or you may reject it entirely, deeming it as unimportant. It is not one of your values, when in fact, you have a deep connection to it and you do actually crave to have your own sense of wealth, your own sense of security more than anything, because this house deals so much with security, especially being ruled by the earth sign Taurus, which is all about foundations, security. However, this is also the house of values, so it's the house of sentiment. What you have sentimental attachment or detachment to will run a lot of your life. So if something in your childhood build a sentiment that does not align with the idea of money, then you will potentially reject it. Or you'll think that everything relies on money because you may have grown up poor, perhaps. You may have equated the answers to everything to money. So therefore, everything you're doing is ran by this idea of money, whether you like it or not, whether you think money's a good thing or a bad thing. It's something that seems to always be a theme in your life, whether you like it or don't like it. Because of this, you have built a strong dissociation from your inner value and what you actually see as worthy of your time and your dedication. You base a lot of your actions on the fear that you can lose everything at any moment or that there will never be enough. So you may hoard things, you may make choices out of this scarcity mindset. And it's all based on this feeling of hyper control. Like if I can control all of my wealth assets and my material things and whatever, then I can have everything I need. I can control whether we lose money or gain money, and I'll never have to be in the position I used to be. And what this is doing is it's placing way too much value on the external world, on material things to make you feel better about your internal being. And your internal state is relying on the fictitious security of what you acquired externally for yourself. What Saturn wants here for you is slow, steady financial growth, but not just slow, steady financial growth that creates the foundation for great material success, but it wants that material success to actually stand on values that are true to who you are. You must uncover your sense of self-worth and your sense of true inner values. What do you actually believe in? What do you actually want? What do you actually think is valuable and worthy of your time and energy and investment? Those are the things you need to be building this foundation on, or else it's just the glass house that can easily be broken as much as you think you have built the gates around it and have protected it and reinforced it in the ways that it needs to be. It's all fictitious if it's not built on the values that actually matter to you. Healing begins to happen, and mastery of Saturn in the second house happens when you realize money is energy. It is not your identity. It reacts on an energetic level to you and how aligned you are internally. Number 2 is you build gentle discipline, not obsessive control. Separate your worth from your income. Plan long term based on real values. When self-worth stabilizes, abundance will flow naturally. Saturn in the third house. You have the potential to become someone whose words carry so much impact just by speaking, by writing, by being. This is because the third house is popularly known as the house of communications, but communication goes so much deeper. The third house is heavily connected to how you learn, how you process information, your mental process, your mental state, how you communicate your thoughts, your beliefs, your ideas, and it's your everyday expression of yourself, especially verbally. It is also heavily connected to the experience you had with your siblings because your siblings were your first mark of communication. They were the first experiences you had with trying to communicate who you are to other people. It's the first experiences you had with inviting other people into your mind. So having Saturn in the third can entail that you became very reserved with how you express yourself. Wherever Saturn resides, you can tend to reject the nature of where it resides in. So here, instead of healthily expressing yourself verbally and communicating and speaking up, speaking your opinions, your thoughts, especially when it came to siblings in your childhood, something made you reserved. You decided that being quiet was more important for whatever reason, and you needed to numb your voice. You could have been maybe around overbearing siblings, family members in general, authority figures, or perhaps you were put in situations where you were shamed for what you thought and it made you afraid to speak up for yourself. Maybe you were heavily reprimanded for ever sharing your opinion or asking questions, and so you associate that with repercussions. Whatever the case may be, one thing is probably true if you have Saturn in the third. It's that you have a strong feeling of always being misunderstood. So you think that staying quiet is better than risking being further misunderstood by speaking up. Because of that, you have built this very rigid mental state or this almost rejection of the intellect. You may be someone who actually feels a bit annoyed and triggered by somebody who speaks their mind quite frequently, or someone who even comes off very articulate and intellectual, and you find that impressive. It may actually come out as envy. A lot of times, whatever house, whatever area of life we have Saturn in, we can experience envy towards the people who display what we struggle with, but what we so deeply want to display ourselves. In this case, Saturn in the third, it's your ability to articulate and conversate and speak the things that matter to you, because it's not just about how you communicate with the third house. The values that you built in the second and who you are, your core identity based on the first house, those now feed and bleed into the third house, and you now want to express yourself verbally. Verbal expression is so important. If you've ever had it taken from you for some reason, for example, I was sick sometime like a year or 2 years ago where my throat was just ravished by some virus. I don't know what happened, but I could not speak. I remember being at emergency care and I was like speaking like this, but it hurt so bad to even speak like that, trying to tell the doctor what was wrong with me. And it was so incredibly painful and I couldn't speak. I was only speaking because I was at the doctor, but after that, I didn't speak for about a week. I didn't say a word at all. And it was so sad. It made me so immensely sad. So your communication is so much more than just knowing how to put words together and speak intelligently or eloquently. It is about speaking your truth. Being able to communicate who you are is such an important aspect of this life. And this is really a focus with Saturn in the third. So because of that, you may reject people who seem to naturally speak who they are, speak up for themselves, speak their opinions, speak eloquently, because you yourself want to be able to do that. But from the outside looking in, you may be like, that person's so full of themselves, or you laugh at intellect. You're like, look at them thinking they know everything and so on and so forth. But not just on an intellectual level, on an emotional level, it might be hard for you to really communicate and navigate those difficult, deeper emotional conversations with people. So you may come off very cold, aloof, and detached, or like you don't care because you won't know how to apologize. You won't know how to even address a concern in the first place. And a lot of this, again, might go back to sibling dynamics that you had, because again, they were your first experience of interaction with others if you did have siblings. So therefore, maybe arguing with them kind of made you remember that you don't want to have emotional conversations. Maybe you had an emotional parent and your parents were getting divorced and you kind of had to be the child mediator. I know that happens to a lot of children who come from a divorced household. You can sometimes start to quiet yourself or reserve yourself because you had to be this really young mediator between two grown adults who were struggling to compromise, come together. Now, not just being reserved, but you might also become overly articulate. So everything you say is so overly thought out. You think about it so hard, and you really practice to make sure that everything you say is as perfect as possible. Like if you could, you would probably try to rehearse everything before you say it. Actually, if you've watched the new show Wonder Man is a wonderful example of potentially having Saturn in the third and how it would maybe show up in relationships, especially because Simon Williams, who is the main character, he's an aspiring actor and he tries really hard to act the role out perfectly to the point that he overthinks it, and he tries to make sure that he has all the lore on the character that he's acting as, and he has to hyper examine all the lines, and he kind of doesn't leave any room in trusting his natural way of communicating himself and being able to translate a character into real life. He could never go off script as an actor. And he actually has a scene where, well, I won't ruin anything for you, but just know this is a great character to kind of replicate that Saturn in the third. And one of the reasons he has suppressed his emotions, his verbal expression, and he overthinks and tries to make everything so perfect is heavily related to the fact that he has a power that can be very dangerous if he gets too emotional and he lets himself erupt. So in early childhood, he figured that out and he started to greatly suppress all his emotions. He became extremely quiet, would hardly ever talk or express anything of meaning because he was afraid of what that would entail. So with that being said, the healing that happens and the way you begin to master Saturn in the third house is when you realize that your words are truly energy. Use them wisely. Words are a way of spell casting. It is called spelling for a reason. Use them wisely, use them with intention and with heart. Speak even when uncomfortable. Learn how to use your voice and use it authentically. Don't always overplan or over-rehearse and overthink what you're going to say. Trust yourself to speak what you need to speak. Refine your mind through discipline. Be sure that you're continuing to challenge and stimulate the mind because the mind needs that. Intellect is not a bad thing, but also intellect is a great strength for you specifically and this placement. Learning new things could be very important to you and empowering the Saturn placement and making you more confident in the way that you speak and how you communicate. Stop hiding your thoughts. That goes back to speaking even when uncomfortable. But even if it means not hiding your thoughts from yourself, don't suppress them. Maybe journal about them. That could really help. Recognize that your voice becomes powerful when it's rooted in inner alignment with who you are. Saturn in the fourth house. Your ultimate potential comes from building such a strong, emotionally secure inner foundation that you can never be shaken by anyone external or anything external. The fourth house in astrology denotes themes from childhood, our emotional security, our emotional fulfillment, family themes, and especially our inner child. The fourth house is considered the darkest point in the zodiac wheel. It directly faces off with the midheaven. So the midheaven has to deal with how we appear on stage, basically like our public image, our public career, how we carry ourselves publicly and what we aim for on the stage of the public. The fourth house is the opposite. The fourth house is who we are at our deepest core. And it really has a lot to do with the shadows and the wounds and the emotional wounds that we developed because of childhood. Whatever wounds our inner child tends to harbor. And so it's through the fourth house and any placements that we have there, whatever sign we have there, where we learn the deepest things about who we were as a child and what may be plaguing us to this point and holding us back as an adult because of our inner child. I do have a video all about this house that you can go watch if you would like more insight on how this connects to the inner child, but it's a huge shadow work oriented house for sure. So when you have Saturn in the fourth house, Saturn often means that you face a lot of self-rejection in the area of that house, meaning for some reason, something that happened in your childhood may have caused you to reject your inner child and reject the nature of that area of life. May instead of being a family-oriented person, you may stray very far from your family because you want to protect yourself. You associate the closeness of familial, intimate bonds with something dangerous to you and your mental state and your emotional health. So because of that, you may be super self-isolating, whereas somebody who maybe has their sun in the fourth house is somebody who loves having people around and loves creating connection and familial bonds. But because you have Saturn in the fourth, you do want this at your deepest core. Family and connection and intimate bonds with people that are truly meaningful are so important to you, but you reject that nature. You reject that sector of life for an illusion of safety that you're creating for yourself. This emotional isolation you put yourself through definitely breeds greater feelings of being disconnected from your roots. And because you feel so disconnected from the roots of who you are as a person, you develop this feeling of guilt or this deep sense that you will never be good enough and you don't mean anything to anyone and nobody cares about you. A lot of times the narratives that we develop wherever Saturn resides, we tend to develop a self-deprecating narrative, but a lot of times we're the ones helping feed that self-deprecating narrative. So you may find yourself thinking with Saturn in the fourth, you may think nobody needs me, nobody wants me, I'm never going to have this close of a bond with anyone. I'm never going to have my own sense of family. I'm displaced from family. I'm displaced from people because of it. But really, you're self-isolating in order to try and emotionally regulate and to try to protect yourself emotionally. And because you self-isolate, you'll blame it on other people. You'll try to blame it on maybe bad experiences that you keep having with people and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you are trying to protect yourself because you long more than anything for a stable place to call home. Whether it's an environment, a person, a group of people, a community of some kind, you want somewhere to call home. But because you're so afraid of what home looks like, what that potentially entails, you reject any sign of home potentially forming for you. The fourth house is also ruled by Cancer and the moon itself, which the moon rules over emotions, the emotional tides that we experience. That's why the moon sign, wherever our moon is placed, tells us so much about our emotional nature, how we tend to emotionally process things, our emotional health, what gives us emotional nourishment, etc. So diving into the Saturn in the fourth house, you are really fighting with what gives you true emotional nourishment and what gives you healthy emotional expression. But those are parts of you that you are heavily suppressing because you're trying to protect your inner child. I haven't read this book myself, but I know it is very popular. But a book that's coming to mind as I speak about Saturn in the fourth that may be good for you to read is The Body Keeps the Score. This has a lot, this whole theme from the little bit that I know of this book, is that it has so much to do with the score that your body keeps from the trauma you've experienced throughout your life. But Saturn in the fourth, the trauma may have been heavily experienced and concentrated in the childhood because it is the house of the inner child. But it is exactly that nature that you're suppressing and rejecting, which is your inner child, which is your emotional state, your emotional nourishment, that needs to be fed. A light needs to be shown on that and fed in order for you to unlock your own true sense of home and start building that foundation for yourself that does not rely on anyone else. Because you're playing a dangerous game here where you may be finding home, quote unquote, in places where you should not be finding home. It may lead you to even unhealthier environments and unhealthier relationships and people because you so desperately want that, but you are also avoiding the places that could truly give you that. The places that truly give you a sense of foundation and home come from deep vulnerability. And if you can't face that deep vulnerability that you're suppressing in yourself, you will never have the home that has the emotional security that cannot be shaken by anything external because you continue relying on the external for emotional validation. So healing begins to happen and you start to master Saturn in the fourth house when you realize that emotional security must be built internally so no one can shake it or take it from you. Vulnerability is true strength. It is probably the most courageous, deepest strength you can have. Releasing guilt, active practices to release guilt that you harbor from your childhood, especially. Practices that allow you to come home to yourself, maybe reconnecting to the inner child through activities you enjoyed as a child, reigniting artistic hobbies, creative hobbies. And when you become emotionally wise through experience and you allow yourself to learn from your experiences and integrate them into who you are rather than rejecting them and running from them. Saturn in the 5th house. Your ultimate potential is to become somebody whose joy, playfulness, authenticity, and creativity becomes something meaningful to not just yourself, but to others. The 5th house is ruled by Leo and the sun itself, and it deals with themes about creativity, romance, children, the joy of children, and self-expression, self-authenticity. When you have Saturn in the 5th house, you're dealing with themes around expressing and indulging in your authentic sense of joy. Especially as we become adults, we tend to reject joyful activities and joyful energy because we feel like it needs to be sacrificed or controlled for the sake of being a refined, composed, mature adult. But these two do not need to be separate. We need joy in our lives. And the 5th house is really anything that has to do with childlike joy. And not just experiencing the childlike joy, but expressing it as well, not withholding it. Because when we start to withhold the childlike joy because we don't want to seem weird or silly or immature, a lot of times that's where we start to go wrong as adults. That's where we start to lose the inner spark. I like to see the 5th house as where we uncover our spark, what leads to us staying connected to our inner spark, what lights our flame and our passion. By igniting the flame and passion within you, you also ignite your long lost creativity. Something we also naturally express as a child and we tend to lose as we grow older. But when you have Saturn in a certain area of life, that area of life is often one that you reject or suppress out of fear of something. So because you had Saturn in the 5th, a lot of times there may have been some type of fear of rejection that developed, mainly because of your childhood. Saturn tells us a lot about the karmic cycles we're experiencing in life, a lot of them beginning in childhood and experienced in childhood. So with Saturn in the 5th, again, you may reject childlike joy because something in your early life caused you to feel like you had been rejected by expressing joy. Maybe you had very, very serious Saturnian parents. Maybe your parents themselves or some authority in your home or somebody in your home or in your childhood had a huge impact on how you creatively express yourself. You may have found that you may have started to equate your joy and your authenticity and self-expression with something bad, something immature, something shameful. And because of that, you have a difficult time enjoying life as you grow up because you have so suppressed that inner spark that you now maybe try to snuff it out as soon as you start to feel it begin. And because of this, you probably have immense creative blocks as well. Maybe you have tried to do something creative because maybe you have other placements that make you want to be an artist of some kind. But because you have Saturn in the 5th, you just don't know why you have no artistic inspiration, and you may question if it's even worth it for you. Am I even supposed to be an artist? Why is this so difficult for me? If you have Saturn in the 5th, your creative blocks are probably coming from being so in the logical, rational mind rather than in your authentic, raw, childlike joy, because you've lost the connection to that passion and that creativity. Every time I talk about anything that revolves around Leo, the sun, and the 5th house, I talk a lot about the sacral chakra and the root chakra. The root chakra is more so Aries and Mars, but I consider the sacral chakra an extension, a direct extension of the root chakra. And these chakras have so much to do with keeping our creativity alive because the sacral chakra is connected to reproduction, sensuality, and reproduction is creation. That is quite literally the energy of creation. And the 5th house harbors this energy of creation in it. But you can only have that creation ignited if you keep that spark ignited. If you allow that spark to consistently be snuffed out, then you tend to lose and dissociate from that energy of creation and you experience creative blocks. Or you just, maybe you're not an artist type, you just experience difficulty enjoying anything in life. You might feel like you have to earn joy, like there's some type of weird transactional trade-off that has to happen for you to experience childlike joy and warmth and happiness. But because we're also connected to the passionate, sensual energy of creation, this house also has a lot to do with how we experience love as well, how we experience that feeling of passion. And we may kind of treat love extremely transactional as a way to try and protect ourselves. If you have Saturn in the fifth, it might be a way that you hide your true self and make sure that love stays within your control. Because another thing that can be a Leo type energy is the energy of control. It's that fixed fire energy. You have the fire, and fire is wild, and you do need to tame it. It is hard to tame, but Leo very much wants to make sure they keep a sustained fire going. They don't always want the crazy, chaotic spark and flames and blazes that maybe Sagittarius and Aries want. They can kind of have a control energy to them because of that. So with the way that you handle and experience love, which is something that often unravels us and causes us to reveal a lot of things we've managed to keep hidden because we tend to lose ourselves in the feeling of love and passion. You yourself might try to treat it very structured and transactional to avoid losing yourself in it, quote unquote, losing yourself. But the reality is to really experience the joy of life, the meaningful moments of life, and to be present, to be creative, to be sensual, passionate, and full of spark. We need to be able to lose ourselves to something. It's about releasing surrender, essentially. When you're a child, you're not thinking, I can't be happy that the sun's out today. I have work to do. No, you're just happy that the sun's out and you're beaming with joy and you want to go out and soak it up and play in it. You don't feel like you had to earn going out and playing in the sun. So it's kind of with Saturn in the fifth, letting go of that type of mentality. With that being said, healing starts to happen and mastery of Saturn in the fifth starts to happen when you make space for play, not just feeling like you can only quote unquote play when you've earned it, reclaiming your inner childlike joy, creating without needing external validation, approval, or fearing the rejection of whatever you create. Create just to create. Release that control, surrender to it. Rejection, if it does happen, is valuable redirection. It is not to define who you are. It does not mean you have failed. And joy strengthens your power. It does not weaken it. Saturn in the sixth house. Your ultimate potential with Saturn in the sixth is to become a master of daily discipline in a way that not only reinforces your powerful integrity, but also makes you a powerful force of service to yourself and to others. This may not sound very exciting, but let me explain what I mean. The sixth house has a lot to do with our daily routines. It is ruled by Virgo and Mercury. Mercury is the planet of the communication and mental process, and Virgo is the earth sign, the mutable earth sign, that is great at organization and structuring. But Virgo doesn't do things only born from rationality. Virgo is part of the service axis, which is what I call it. I don't know if that's actually a term for it, but it's the axis of Virgo and Pisces. Both signs have a deeper sense of servitude for some reason. It's something they usually cannot deny. So when dealing with the sixth house and the themes of Virgo and Mercury here, we have a house that revolves a lot around our daily routines and what those daily routines mean to us, whether they align with us, and knowing that important change and important movement in our lives starts with the daily routine. It starts on the micro level. I kind of think of the book Atomic Habits. That's what comes to mind when I think of that. That actually might be a great book for Saturn in the sixth house to read if you haven't already. But yeah, the sixth house deals a lot with daily routines, how our daily routines provide a valuable service to ourselves and to others. It deals with conflict resolution among peers because the sixth house also has a lot to do with the workplace and the workplace routines. And health. Health is a huge one for the sixth house. What all of these categories have in common is that they have to do with the daily routine. What do we do as a daily routine? We go to work. How do we take care of our health on a daily basis? How much sleep do we get? Because of that, how do we interact with our peers around us? And wherever Saturn resides in your chart is where we experience a lot of rejection. And a lot of times that rejection is coming from ourselves. It's coming from within. We tend to reject that area of life in some way or struggle with it because we are trying to protect ourselves, or we're trying to overly control that area of life in a way that is not healthy for us. When it comes to Saturn in the sixth house, because you're dealing with that Virgoan, mercurial nature, you tend to struggle with feeling like everything has to be absolutely perfect in your daily life. You may find that you become very obsessive about certain things. We tend to leave the obsession talk for the eighth house topics, but actually, the sixth house has a large obsession energy that we need to be careful of, especially when you have Saturn here, because Saturn tends to bring a rigid energy to where it resides. So, for people who have Saturn in the sixth house, you might find that you try to make everything so perfect and you obsess over making it perfect. You obsess with being productive in some way and you equate that to your self-worth and whether you're doing something meaningful. An example of this is this house deals with work and health a lot. So say that you are so afraid of something going wrong with your health, or maybe you have dealt with something in your health, whether it's extreme or minor, whatever the case may be. Your doctor may have told you, or someone may have told you how to handle this and how to be healthy despite whatever it is you're dealing with. But you have taken it up 10 levels because you're so hyper fixated and worried about something. So now you're like, okay, I have to be on this super restrictive diet and I have to eat only this and only that, because if I don't, then these are all the potential ways that my health could get so much worse. But no one told you you had to be that extreme. But there's a tendency with this house, because Mercury is the magnifying glass. I always say it's the zoom in on everything. It zooms in on the micro details. Because of that, there's an overfixation and obsession with the details of what you're doing and taking it to the extreme. So you may hyper restrict yourself, and then you'll be full of contempt and resentment towards other people. Maybe in your work life, in your home life, or whatever the case may be, because you're thinking, I hate that they can eat all the pizza they want and I can't have a slice of pizza. But no one told you you can't have a slice of pizza. You told yourself that you can't, because you've taken this health doctrine to the absolute extreme that it could possibly go, and you're spreading yourself incredibly thin. But it's also because you want perfection out of whatever it is that you do. You want to make sure that you're anticipating everything that could go wrong and everything that could happen in your daily life to prevent a certain outcome. But what this is only doing is that it's giving you chronic stress or certain health anxieties that don't need to be part of your life. Saturn in the sixth can definitely deal with a lot of health issues and a lot of health challenges, and a lot of it is connected to the nervous system. Themes around the sixth house and Virgo and Mercury create a hyperconnection to the nervous system. So whenever you're creating chronic stress or high level stress for yourself, especially in the mind where you're overthinking and send yourself into spirals, it immediately gives you feedback through the nervous system. It wouldn't even be outlandish to say that people with Saturn in the sixth might deal with things like rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune diseases of some kind, because chronic stress is one of the primary ways to start shutting down the nervous system. And that is something Saturn in the sixth can really struggle with because of this obsession. And not just the obsession with the productivity and the hyperfixation on perfection, but having immense feelings of guilt around resting of any kind, because there's a feeling that they need to optimize everything that they do. And if they don't, they're losing some sort of gain or competition, because this house has a lot to do with peers, like in the workplace. They may find that they're always in some type of power struggle, whether it's in their imagination or not. they can definitely create their own narrative of competition where there is none, or they can get so fixated on whether they're being the absolute best. And it again goes back to the need for perfection. Maybe there was something that happened early in your childhood because Saturn deals with karmic loops, whether it's in your childhood or in past life, where you just were made to feel so inadequate and you were made to feel like you had to overcompensate in every area of your everyday life in order to be seen as valuable. Virgo placement energy really translates into sixth house energy, can really worry about their perceived value. Again, it goes back to that servitude nature that they can't really deny. It's they want to be seen as valuable to others, and it comes from a deeper need to make the lives of others better. A lot of people of Saturn in the sixth could potentially become amazing health coaches, fitness coaches, maybe amazing doctors or holistic practitioners of some kind, because they want to be somebody who can, their attention to detail, their intellect, their knowledge, their hyperfixation on perfection, they want it to be used in a way that serves others, that makes the lives of others better as well, and therefore gives them something fulfilling from their life, something that also may provide material success, because Saturn has a lot to do with how we obtain material success. So healing happens and mastery of Saturn in the sixth starts to happen when you realize that you can redefine productivity. Productivity is not just about your maximum obsessive output. It is so much deeper than that. So finding a pathway of productivity that is in alignment with you and what you really want to do, not just creating output just to create output. Number two is to realize that rest is another part of your strategy. Rest is your superpower, okay? Build sustainable routines, not routines that are going to burn you out and create chronic stress in your life and also make you resentful towards everybody else around you. Heal the mind and not just the body. Consistency is greater than intensity. I don't think I need to say any more than that. Saturn in the seventh house. Your ultimate potential is linked to the fulfilling partnerships that you build that are built on true trust, vulnerability, and integrity. The seventh house is popularly known as the house of partnerships, dealing with business partnerships, marriage, relationships of really any kind, contracts with other people, your potential enemies that challenge you, and how you deal with one-on-one dynamics. For a deeper understanding, the seventh house is ruled by Venus and the air sign Libra, the sign of the scales. And wherever you have Saturn, that area of life may be one in which you try to overly self-protect, self-correct, and reject completely, all because you're trying to protect yourself in some way. Something early in life or in a past life may have told you that that is unsafe. The area of life that Saturn resides in is unsafe for some reason. But in reality, it's where you unlock the deepest fulfillment that you possibly can in this lifetime and the deepest sense of mastery. So when you have Saturn in the house of partnerships of all kinds, this means that for some reason, you probably reject and detest partnership of any kind. Something about connecting and creating a close partnership with anybody or anything is equated to a lack of safety for you. It makes you feel like you may be losing your independence, you're losing your sense of autonomy, you're losing a sense of safety, and it's an illusion of safety because in reality, you more than anybody probably crave to build meaningful, intimate partnerships of all kinds with other people. That is something that you feel pulled to do. Simultaneously, you are afraid of those partnerships because they require intimacy and vulnerability, things that you have deemed as unsafe. Maybe early on in life, something happened to make you think that it's unsafe. An example could be that you witnessed parents getting divorced. Maybe it was a really ugly divorce and you witnessed just how much damage that did to them. And as a child, you had to watch that play out for years of your childhood in your most vulnerable growth state of mind. Now you think, oh my gosh, I never want to give myself to another person that way. Marriage is bad. Close relationships are bad. You can't trust people. You can't be vulnerable with them because that just leads you down a road of pain. If it wasn't something that you experienced with parents, perhaps you experienced it in friendships friendships or other partnerships. Maybe you had repeated business partnerships that went bad, they went awry for some reason. Maybe you had repeated friendships of some kind or romantic relationships that ended in betrayal. They ended in sadness, hurt, pain, and you're tired of it. You grew tired of it and you thought, you know what? I'm not even going to bother anymore because why? If this is what it leads to. However, you'll never be able to deny the pull of Saturn's growth through that area of life. And so you're always going to feel pulled towards having those connections again. As someone myself who has Saturn in the 11th house, which is another house similar to the house of partnerships, it has to do with community on a greater level. I've experienced a lot of those types of trials with people where I've experienced consistent betrayal, energy draining, taken advantage, etc. And it led me down a dark road for a while of not healthily connecting with people because of what I had equated social dynamics with. But at the end of the day, I can never deny the pull that I have to be in those social dynamics and to do something meaningful with them. So similarly, with Saturn in the 7th, you may not be able to deny that pull, but your consistent avoidance of commitment and projecting the blame of failed partnerships and everything onto other people is going to keep you in this karmic loop of Saturn in the 7th. Because what you're doing is you're rejecting the opportunity to realize the deepest parts of yourself that you need to look at. The 7th house is the house opposite of our rising sign. It's popularly referred to as the descendant sign, whereas our rising sign is the ascendant sign. And basically, if you want to know what kind of maybe opposition or enemies you might attract in this lifetime, you can look at your 7th house, and that might tell you a lot about the opposing energies you attract or the energies that challenge you. So with Saturn in the 7th, this is only amplified. You have Saturn in the house of opposition, the descendant sign, if you will. This means that a lot of times the relationships you develop, the partnerships that you have with Saturn in the 7th are very karmic. They are meant to be like holding up a mirror that teaches you about yourself through opposition. It might be meeting someone who is very similar to you in nature, and they hold up a mirror to all the things in you that you're rejecting. Because of how they are naturally, they embody things that you want to embody, but because they do, you consider them, whether you realize it unconsciously or consciously, you reject them. And you kind of despise them because you're like, oh, they think they're all that and they do this and that. When in reality, that's holding up a mirror to things you wish that you embodied yourself. But we even see this with people who oppose us, people who we could consider outright enemies or haters in this lifetime. And this isn't to gaslight you into thinking that everything's always your fault, but you will notice themes. Wherever Saturn resides, you will notice themes. You will notice patterns. At least if you're aware enough, which I hope you're self-aware enough if you're watching this video, that you'll notice patterns. And so because you're noticing a pattern of repeated types of enemies and betrayals and failed partnerships and whatnot, I would hope that you start to wonder where you might be playing a part in that. And so this is one of the most important things to realize about having Saturn in the 7th, is a lot of the dynamics that you create are like holding up a direct mirror to you. What is it that you're rejecting in yourself that is leading to these dynamics to go the way that they go or to be repeatedly attracted to you? The more that you consistently and project the blame onto the others that you're creating these dynamics with, the more that you stray from unlocking what is actually going on a deeper level with you, and therefore creating the partnerships you actually desire to create in this life. So healing begins to happen, and mastery of Saturn in the 7th really starts to happen when you start to build true and honest boundaries. You don't create connections just because you want connection so bad, but you actually just keep it surface level, superficial, and reject intimacy, or you overgive and overgive to try and receive some type of validation that is built on a superficial connection. Speak your actual truth and dare to be vulnerable with another human. You will never have the lasting foundation of real partnership if you don't. Choose alignment over a fantasy. Commitment is just integrity. It does not mean giving up control, giving up your independence or your autonomy. Emotional maturity unlocks lasting love. Saturn in the eighth house. Your ultimate potential lies in your ability to truly surrender. Surrender to meaningful connection, intimacy, transformation, and emotional depth. The eighth house, popularly known as the house that is ruled by Scorpio and Pluto, the house of the underworld, of the unseen. Some deeper themes that go on with the eighth house are themes of intimacy with other people, shared finances, which I like to kind of translate as really just sharing yourself with another person energetically, or sharing yourself with something else energetically and surrendering to that. A self-transformation, past traumas, your deepest shadows, and power dynamics. Wherever Saturn resides in the chart tends to be an area that we will overcorrect, self-protect, and we tend to reject because we associate for some reason the nature of that house or that sign that Saturn's in as unsafe. A lot of times it has something to do with energy we're carrying from our childhood. Something early on in our lives may have taught us that, in this case, because it's the eighth house, that intimacy is not safe. Sharing yourself with someone is not safe. Maybe you yourself are not safe. Maybe you are terrified of your own emotional depth because the eighth house revolves around our deepest emotional shadows. If you wanted to recognize where you might need to do deep shadow work, the eighth house is definitely a huge house to look at to dive into shadow work, because it is arguably where we try to bury parts of ourselves. Like, we try to put parts of ourselves in the grave of the eighth house. So when you have Saturn in the eighth house, it means that you definitely reject this emotional depth with yourself, and therefore you have a hard time giving any emotional depth to anybody else. And usually you will not, no matter what. You probably have extremely high fears of vulnerability. You associate them with not being safe. They trigger your abandonment wounds of some kind. There could be abandonment wounds that come from childhood. Maybe it was from a parent that didn't pay you any mind. Maybe it's because you had emotional outbursts and somebody rejected you, ignored you. Maybe a partner in the past left you because your emotions were too much, you were too much, whatever the case may be. There's definitely deep emotional trauma around being abandoned and feeling like you are not able to be fully seen in your totality. Like, you are way too much, you have too much darkness. Your darkness needs to be withheld for the sake of not just yourself, protecting yourself, but protecting others too. There can be this sense of like, I need to protect everybody from me. I'm too awful and I'm too dark and nobody understands me. Feeling deeply misunderstood and often feeling like you have hyper control issues because you need to make sure things go a certain way so your true self is not revealed, or so you don't lose yourself emotionally. You want to have everything planned for. It's kind of like, you can think werewolf energy, you know? I don't know. This is just something that's coming to mind. This is an example that just came to my mind, but someone who has to live life as a werewolf, maybe you have certain situations that make you transform. I know there's different takes on a werewolf, you know. For some of them, it's like great emotional rage can trigger their transformation. So because of that, you have to make sure that you tiptoe, you hyper control your plans, how other people move around you, how you are around people, to make sure that you don't trigger the transformation, to make sure that the beast does not get exposed to anybody. And a lot of times when we see this play out in mythological creatures, such as the werewolf, we see them become paranoid, where they're hyper controlling every situation, because if not, they're afraid of what might happen when they lose control. There can be this type of energy going on with Saturn in the eighth house. And funny enough, this can lead to also sexual suppression. While we're on the note of mythological creatures, think of, the werewolf and think of the vampire. Both have this odd kind of like sexual undertone to them. The eighth house has to do with sexual intimacy as well, because again, I like to see the theme of quote unquote shared finances as the deeper theme of sharing yourself with somebody and surrendering to somebody intimately. So because of that, a lot of sexual power is harbored within the eighth house. And when you have Saturn in the eighth, you might actually experience great suppression and that hyper control issue might translate into this part of your life because you are afraid of being seen that vulnerably. And it might actually ruin your sexual inhibition because of that. Kind of the way that, Edward doesn't want to hurt Bella. He's like, I can't let go, or I'm going to hurt you, or whatever. It's again, I just really see the themes of the vampire and the werewolf within the eighth house, and the way that they feel they need to carry themselves because they have this deep darkness, almost like they're always carrying a deep dark secret that's just looming over everything, and they're afraid that at any moment that deep dark secret's going to ruin everything for them and for everybody else. Saturn in the eighth is definitely deeply connected to generational trauma as well, which again can tie to the werewolf and the vampire, which have deep generational trauma brought about by generations of vampires being born through bites, or werewolves being born through family, through tribes, etc. So again, this is back to that deep shadow work energy that this house entails. But lastly, with Saturn in the eighth here, there may be a lot of lessons around shared finance, because I again like to see money as energy, as an energetic currency that can build certain values in our life based on what we have experienced with it. So with Saturn in the eighth house, there may have been a lot of experiences where especially parents had a very difficult relationship with finances and with their shared finances. And for some reason, maybe they made bad investments. Maybe you come from a wealthier or better off family and they made bad investments, and because of that, you lost everything. Whatever the case may be, you can see shared finances as something that is very dangerous, and you want to hoard your own finances. And you also associate that with keeping your power, because again, this house has to do with power dynamics and kind of the hierarchy of that. And you want to make sure that you never fall prey to anything. So you might try to keep yourself higher up on the totem pole as much as possible by maybe hoarding finances to yourself. And you might over rely on finances or things of that nature to equate to how much power and sovereignty you have and how much control you have over your own life. When in fact, what it's doing is keeping you from connecting to anybody. You almost emotionally isolate in order to protect yourself and to protect your shadows, really, when in reality, you're not even willing to face your own shadows. And until you're willing to face up to your own shadows and your deepest, darkest nature, you will never be able to share that with anybody else. And it is undeniable that with the eighth house, you have such a craving for intimacy. You cannot deny that you have a craving for intimacy with others, but you also have the craving to grow from the shadows. The greatest symbolic expression of an evolved Scorpio is the phoenix rising from the ashes. With Saturn in the eighth, you're meant to rise from your ashes, but instead, what you're doing is you're staying in the ashes. And you're like, if I just stay here and I clean house, then we'll be good. We're good to go. But really, you feel an innate pull to become the phoenix. These are the ways, everything I just talked about are the ways in which you're keeping yourself from doing so. So healing starts to happen, and mastery of Saturn in the eighth house begins to happen when you realize that true power comes from surrender. When you let yourself merge with things around you. You don't always try to keep yourself as a separate entity, because that's not even actually possible, but you're also hurting yourself more by doing so. Explore your shadow consciously. Dive into deep shadow work that resonates with you to explore the shadow and stop hiding from it. Stop letting it run your life and ruin your life as a result. Trust your own emotional depth. Trust that sense of intuition, reconnect to your emotion, and start regaining faith in emotion rather than seeing it as dangerous ground to play on. Start seeing your emotion as strength to use. And lastly, intimacy is courage. Vulnerability is brave. Saturn in the ninth house. Your ultimate potential is to become a grounded speaker, communicator, and authority in actual experienced truth of life. The ninth house is ruled by Sagittarius and Jupiter. It is the house of expansion. When we think of expanding the mind, expanding our life experiences, expanding our philosophies and our education, we think of the ninth house. These are the major themes that fall under this house. And because of that, it has a lot to do with travel and a lot to do with the faith that we follow in our lives, especially the spiritual faith primarily. But wherever Saturn resides, we tend to reject the truth of that house because we want to protect ourselves from whatever we've experienced early on in life, oftentimes, that caused us to reject that area of life. For example, if you have Saturn in the ninth house, this house has a lot to do with the spiritual faith that we build. Ultimately, Saturn in the ninth wants us to build a faith that really aligns with us and aligns with our lived experience. But what may have happened is you may have been part of a very rigid belief system as a child, and maybe you entertained that belief system, but you found out later on that your pastor was stealing money from everybody or something like that that made you feel betrayed by the belief system. And now maybe you reject faith entirely and you reject spiritual doctrines of any kind entirely. Or perhaps you're somebody who you decided that you found safety in rigid spiritual beliefs, but they don't actually align with you. But because you have this rigid spiritual belief, you feel like you are right. You have almost a spiritual hierarchy that tends to feed your ego. Because with the ninth house, the shadow sides of it can definitely feed into the ego. When we think of the ninth house and we think of Jupiter, think of Zeus. Zeus is the god associated with the ninth house. So when you think of Zeus being insatiable and greedy and his actions basically all aligning with his ego and his greed, because he's like, I'm the god of gods, I can do whatever I want and no one has a say in it. That is kind of something that Saturn in the ninth can cause someone to go into. That is the path that someone can go down if they aren't careful, because they either associate spiritual doctrine with spiritual ego and hierarchy, or they associate it with a lack of safety and they think that all of it's a lie. So they reject spiritual paths completely because they feel betrayed by it. When in reality, the soul will always feel called with Saturn in the ninth to pursue a spiritual path that is aligned. This is because your soul truly wants expansion. It wants to gain life wisdom through experience. It wants to expand the mentality and the bodily experience, but it feels like it is unsafe to do so. A lot of this can also come from just feeling failed by a lot of the traditional systems as a child. Something I know that I've read about when it comes to previous research on Saturn is that this can actually cause you to have qualms with the traditional education system, because the ninth house has so much to do with expanding the energy, learning about different ways of life, and having an interest in other ways of life. You don't necessarily just accept what you're told and think that that is the only truth. You are the seeker of truth. That's why Sagittarius is symbolized by the centaur with the arrow. There's always a bigger picture thinking going on with Sagittarius and Jupiter energy, where you look at the faraway target and you're like, oh, I want to explore that target and I want to go after that target. You kind of see past, you're kind of naturally disillusioned by a lot of the more traditional things because you feel like there has to be so much more and you want to expand. Just like planet Jupiter being the biggest planet in the solar system, there is no stopping you from the desire to expand. So you may have had early childhood frustration with traditional teachers, the traditional education system, because your nature rejects it. So because of that feeling, you may have become very lost in early life, not really knowing what your path is. So you may overly rely on a different, like a totally opposite path. Maybe you decided to drop out of school early on and tried to find your own way through odd jobs and whatnot, but that has been hard for you and that has been something that you really struggle with. But you will flaunt to people, oh, I do what I want. I'm a free spirit and I don't have to answer to one boss and I'm a dropout and this and that. You may almost take a fictitious pride in it, but in reality, it's still not aligned with you. It's just born from you trying to expand yourself in maybe ways that are not the most healthy and are actually more stressful for you. Or it could come from a place of ego where you're like, none of these traditional systems know what they're talking about, so I'm going to follow this system and I know I'm better than everybody because I follow this system. But in reality, at its core, your exploration of other ways of life feel like this long uphill battle that you just can't seem to find the light to. You can't seem to find the finish post. That target that you have your eyes on just seems to keep getting further and further away and keeps shifting, and you don't know why. And you tend to see that target and you tend to consider that target as something that is known. You're like, I know that target exists and I'm going to keep going after it because that has to be it. That has to be the target. But you keep experiencing this uphill battle. Things keep disillusioning you. Things keep maybe just killing your exploration, your adventure. Things get in the way of your travel. Things get in the way of your learning, whatever the case may be. But you keep your eye on the target. And this can also be born from fearing the unknown. You parade like you are a friend with the unknown. But because you have Saturn in the ninth, you're actually afraid of the unknown, but you're trying to parade around like you're not. But a lot of what expands you and really fulfills your soul and is going to lead you to have the wisdom that makes you an authority in being a truth communicator and a truth seeker is through the unknown. It's through building this sense of faith in life. Because again, this is a house that has a lot to do with spirituality and the belief system we build. It's not so much about rigid traditional belief systems or following a certain system and being better than others by being a free spirit or being a leader in a certain spiritual path. It's more so from living experiences that really connect you to yourself, to your inner alignment, and experiences that give you lived wisdom. And because of that, you reinforce faith in your own inner authority. It's all about having the inner authority and the confidence in your sense of faith to know that the path you're walking is aligned to you, and to then naturally want to share it with other people, whether through being your own type of educator. Maybe you realized higher education is corrupt and you want to take it into your own hands and be your own type of educator, your own type of mentor, your own type of teacher or writer. A lot of times it's very important to translate these lived experiences, once you do expand into the unknown, into something creative or something tangible that can translate it to other people and spread the wisdom. You often naturally want to spread some type of wisdom. Maybe it's just within your own family. You take that upon yourself, or maybe it's on a much larger level. Whatever the case may be, healing happens and mastery of Saturn in the ninth begins to happen when you build your own philosophy, one built on your own authentic life experiences, not on anything else. You allow your beliefs to evolve. You don't get so stuck on the one target that you think has to be the truth and puts you above everybody else. You are willing to allow the belief to evolve and to change with lived experience and wisdom. Wisdom itself comes through that lived experience. Trust the unfolding path. Truth is earned. It is not handed to you. Saturn in the 10th house. Your ultimate potential is in building a long-lasting legacy that not just outlives you, but is built on true humility and integrity. The 10th house is popularly known as the house of career and public image. It is heavily connected to your career success, your reputation, your public authority, your image, your life direction, but most of all, your inherent purpose. This is something that gets lost in translation a lot when it comes to the 10th house, because we have Saturn and Capricorn as the ruler of the 10th house. So Saturn actually resides in its home house when it resides in the 10th house. But we lose the sense of quote unquote purpose when we talk about the rigid nature of the 10th house as if it's all about career success. A lot of times it goes deeper than that, and the deeper theme of the 10th house is our inherent purpose. What our true purpose is and how we often translate that into our public image and our career success. Now, when you have Saturn placed in any certain area, you tend to reject that area of life in some way. And because of that, that area feels like it's filled with challenges, like it's an uphill battle that will never end. And you may question your journey within that area of life a lot. So with Saturn in the 10th, you probably deal with a lot of strife around trying to build career success in some way. You might find that you have such slow career growth. You feel like you're doing more more than everybody else. You work 10 times harder. You're 10 times more present. You are 10 times more capable, yet you never seem to see the results. And this can be the most true before the first Saturn return, which happens around ages 27 to 30. A reminder that I do have a video on Saturn return. If you want to watch it, you can click the link in the description or you can search it and you will find it. But you'll experience very slow career growth, especially within your 20s. You'll probably feel like you're trudging through the mud, trying to build something financially secure and successful for yourself. But a lot of times what happens is you are experiencing so many challenges because you are disconnected from purpose. You have become so disconnected from yourself and so focused on trying to prove yourself because Saturn in the 10th has a deep fear of failure that feeds into what comes off as very impressive ambition. And that impressive ambition is not a bad thing. In fact, it's what will cause you to eventually build a legacy. However, it is not good for that ambition to come from a fear of failure, of how you're perceived as a material success. The 10th house has a lot to do with perception because it does deal with our public image. It is actually the house of the midheaven. So if you know where your midheaven's at, that's actually the axis of the 10th house. It is the highest point of the astrological wheel, the highest point in the sky. So therefore, symbolically, it is also the highest point of where we expose ourselves. It's how we expose ourselves in the world. Because of that, Saturn in the 10th house will make you have a lot of difficulties with how you're being perceived in relation to your success. You might constantly feel this immense pressure, like you are in a pressure cooker racing against time to prove that you can be a material success, even if it denies who you really are. Even if you have to sacrifice your soul, you will do whatever you can to make sure you have the traditional ideas of success, which is career hierarchy, being elite in your career standing, having a nice car, having a nice house, having a good, refined family, whatever the case may be. A lot of times you're so set on proving yourself through these more traditional material values. And you think that you'll feel worthy finally and that you'll have that validation that you want and that feeling of success and fulfillment once you have those things. But that is the lie that this challenge is feeding you. And it is the lie that you are being challenged to overcome. Once you start to recognize the pattern of feeling like you have to prove yourself, you start to realize that true purpose and connecting to your true purpose is what is going to lead you to have the greatest everlasting success that you are looking for. But it's not going to necessarily come in the ways that you think it's going to. And what I mean by that is, whereas you are somebody who is going to have to go through every step of the journey, you cannot skip steps, you cannot fake it. At the same time, you're going to have to learn surrender to the journey as well and recognize that you may have an idea of how something should be happening and coming into fruition, but that is not necessarily how purpose works. Every single step of the way will not necessarily look like what you think it was going to look like. And if something doesn't look the way you thought it would on the journey to your success, you might reject it, throw it out entirely, or think that it is unsafe or uncertain. But in reality, every step of the journey that you take, if it's led with alignment in your purpose, then it is a step you are meant to take. Even if that step looks like failure to you at the moment, there is something grander on the horizon. And that step was a learning curve for you. It was something you were meant to learn. It was meant to become a part of you. Because we have the energy of Saturn and Capricorn ruling over the 10th house, Capricorn is the sign of the sea goat. The sea goat is the goat that is not only meant to traverse mountains, but also meant to get in the water and traverse the water. So you are built in this house to traverse any terrain that comes your way and to be flexible in that way. It is not just about seeing a straightforward ladder ahead of you and knowing like every rung of the ladder is 5 inches apart and this and that. No, when you climb a mountain like the goat or you go into the water, you don't really know what to expect. You can see the general mountain, but you don't know exactly what is waiting for you on that mountain. And you have to have some sense of surrender to that. And that comes with following your purpose, because when you feel a sense of purpose, your purpose will pull you forward whether you like it or not. But the most difficult part is having the slow growth and the slow obstacles that come with this placement, feeling like you're going through a grueling process and questioning whether this process is even where you're supposed to be at. This will be a placement that tests your patience. With that being said, healing starts to happen and mastery of Saturn in the 10th happens when you commit long term to purpose, not just material goals that you think are going to prove something to everyone. Stop seeking applause and validation externally. Recognize that your efforts matter as long as they are aligned and purposeful and intentional. Lead with integrity and humility. Do not lead with, again, external validation and applause at the forefront. Trust that delayed success is success that will be everlasting for you. Saturn in the 11th house. Your ultimate potential is to become not just a pillar of your community, but a pillar of the collective by being your authentically unique, unorthodox self. The 11th house is ruled by Uranus and Aquarius and entails a lot of themes around the social spheres that we create in this lifetime and how we contribute to that social sphere. However, wherever Saturn resides can be an area of life that you learn to reject, or you overly protect yourself from that area of life because something has made you deem it unsafe. When in reality, your soul desires to grow into this area of life and create something meaningful that lasts the test of time. When it comes to Saturn in the 11th house specifically, you may have experienced something that made you doubt creating social connections, networking with others, being part of any communities. This could be a feeling of ostracization, always feeling like you're on the outside looking in whatever social environment you've ever walked into. Even if you make active efforts to be part of a community, there's something about you that probably feels on the outside, like you don't quite fit in, like no one really understands you, or like you feel embarrassed to be yourself because no one understands you. This may cause you to feel a sense of loneliness in life, even at a very young age. And it creates this really weird dissonance within yourself because on one hand, you love the feeling of connection and community. You know that there's something meaningful there, but you yourself don't know why you always feel like an alien in every environment. And even though you try to connect, it doesn't quite work out. Because of that, you may have also experienced a lot of betrayals, a lot of weird energy draining, self-sacrificing situations with other people because of having Saturn in the 11th. Now, you might naturally self-isolate and consider loneliness safety because it means that no one can misunderstand you, no one can think that you're weird, no one can make you feel like you're on the outside. Exposing yourself to social circles exposes vulnerability. Vulnerability and potentially being seen as yourself or having to overthink how you act to try and fit in. This causes you to potentially mask who you really are if you are forced to be in social environments. For example, work is a social environment that a lot of us are forced to be in, and you may be deeply misunderstood by your peers in that work environment, which creates a lot of conflict for you because everyone sees you as maybe aloof or like you think you're better than everybody because you isolate yourself, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or maybe you have tried to connect to your peers, but you actively feel the weight of the mask that you're putting on to protect your true self because you don't think that it'll be accepted by your peers. So being part of any social atmosphere almost feels like a painful reminder to you of all the things that you're afraid of. So now you have trust issues with friendships, you feel the inability to be able to assimilate to any group or be part of any meaningful community. And you may be someone that tries to play it off like you don't care, like, oh, I don't even care if I'm invited, or I don't care, like, I'm happy, content at home with my cat, watching my movies. And whereas that is often true when you have Saturn in the 11th, you very much can feel comfort and loneliness. You learn the most about yourself and you have the most meaningful experiences when you engage in social atmospheres because Saturn tells you where you need to challenge yourself, basically. And if you don't willingly challenge yourself and grow through the challenges, Saturn will bring them to your doorstep. So the repeated trust issues, the betrayals you might have experienced, all of that was brought to your doorstep so you can learn how to find community that resonates with you. Because the reason you're finding these communities that you don't feel you fit in, you won't be accepted, you have to conform, you have to put on a mask, is because they are not resonant with you. Even though you want community, you have to be able to find ones or curate ones that are in resonance with who you really are. But if you're constantly self-isolating and masking who you really are, those communities can never exist. And your ultimate potential with having Saturn in the 11th is that you lean into who you really are, you drop the mask, and by doing so, you courageously step into the social atmosphere or one that you make yourself where people are seeking and desiring authenticity. They can tell that you are authentic. A lot of times, you leave an impact in whatever spaces you enter. Whether you were being masked and trying to conform and assimilate, you probably still left an impact on your environment. Whether it be negative or positive, you left an impact. The way that you leave a positive, meaningful impact that also fulfills you is by being your authentic self, by daring to speak the wisdom you have, by living in such isolation, by feeling like you've been put on the outside or on the bad end of so many situations. But eventually, you become the type of person people are searching for. Especially in this day and age, if you have Saturn in the 11th house, a way that you can kind of see this happening in the social atmosphere now is through the fall of the influencer as we know it. People don't want the show-offy, material, overly pretty, overly curated influencer anymore. They want to find the people that embrace their oddities, their quirkiness, the ones who shine who they really are, whether it's someone who's understated and down to earth or someone who's considered really weird and colorful. People are craving that to connect to. People are recognizing the wisdom in that versus the lack of wisdom and the lack of fulfillment engaging in overly curated things. So when people are ready for that, they come to someone like you. But you have to drop your social armor. You have to be willing to be seen for who you are, to curate the atmospheres that create that type of community. So healing really happens and mastery of Saturn in the 11th happens when you learn that quality over quantity is true and valuable when it comes to curating social atmospheres or being part of any communities. Belonging does not mean blending in. Commit to a cause bigger than you, one that is rooted in true purpose, and you will find the communities that you crave. Authenticity magnetizes aligned community. And real success is when you are feeding something meaningful into the collective, not just when you're focused on yourself and when it's not just one-sided. Saturn in the 12th house. Your ultimate potential lies in your ability to become spiritually wise through spiritual liberation and releasing attachment of some kind. The 12th house is ruled by Neptune and Pisces. So a lot of the themes of the 12th house have to do with the unconscious realm, spirituality connected to the unconscious realm, isolation, spiritual karma, and our hidden fears. Wherever we have Saturn tends to be an area of life where we reject a lot of that nature because we are afraid of what it holds, because we have deemed it unsafe because of certain experiences that we've had. A lot of times these experiences are had in childhood, but it can come from other things, especially prior to our Saturn return, which the first Saturn return happens between the ages of 27 to 30. And I do have a video all about it that will be linked below if you want to watch it. A lot of themes here are very similar to that of Saturn in the 8th house, which is the house of the underworld, the unseen realms as well. But the 12th house, the magnitude is even greater and goes much deeper because it is the house of the subconscious. A lot of the themes that we see in the 12th house have to do around hidden fears. Those fears can stem from many things, but a lot of times, especially with the 12th, it is like a past life karma, past life reincarnation, and or our childhood. There may have been some reason or another that you deemed your internal world unsafe to indulge in. Maybe you had something happen when you were younger. There might be things that burden your soul that come from your childhood, but you're not 100% sure what it is exactly. Whether it's experiences that you don't remember. Like I actually read before that if you have Saturn in the 12th, it could be good to look at what was going on with your mother while you were in the womb. Because a lot of the 12th house experiences can stem from what was happening in the womb at the time. Maybe the mother was going through survival mode, extreme stressors, health conditions of some kind, and that can actually feed into certain fears you're born with. This also goes back to generational trauma as well. Generational trauma that manifests within you. I don't have Saturn in the 12th house, but an example that I could see of this in my own life experience is I used to have these recurring nightmares throughout my childhood, probably up until I was around the age of like 12, because I don't remember having this nightmare anymore after that. Was a recurring nightmare of a group of men chasing me, and I was running for my life, and it would always be through like a dark, what looked like a dark city, like a city at nighttime. And they would always be chasing me down this alleyway, and I would reach the end of the alleyway and I would be trapped, and they would all start approaching me, and then I would wake up. And that could be the incarnation of a past life fear, or maybe even something that came from what my mother was experiencing, either before she had me, as I was conceived, or while I was in the womb. And that's really important because the fears that we deal with when it comes to the 12th house and Saturn in the 12th are ones that we can't quite pinpoint. So it makes it even harder for us to deal with them. And what may happen when you have Saturn in the 12th as a way that you reject this and try to avoid it is through escapism and isolation of some kind. You may find that the material world itself is much too heavy for you, and the emotions that it triggers, the way that you feel connected to everything happening, the way that everything impacts you from the past, present, and everything happening outside of you can just feel like too much in combination. And because, again, you're often responding to things that cannot be tangible, things that you cannot see in front of you, it makes you feel like you're going crazy. A lot of potential mental illnesses might stem with Saturn in the 12th because of the mind and the body trying to grapple with what it cannot actually touch, what it cannot actually feel on a material, physical level. But the irony here is while they kind of reject the material world potentially, as well as their internal world, they'll feel like there's nowhere for them to reside. So because they're trying to escape both worlds, they'll rely on things in the material to escape, such as substance abuse, maybe codependency on other people, maybe having sexual addictions of some kind, different forms of escapism that take a dark path because they feel they have no place. This Saturn placement can very much feel like you are of no worlds and you're just this weird floating mystic vessel and you don't have any type of containment. But Saturn is always trying to bring structure and containment to wherever it is at. So Saturn is trying to bring containment to your soul's spiritual experience. Something that may become very healing for someone with Saturn in the 12th is going on a deep spiritual isolation journey. Not that isolation is always good for this placement necessarily, but it's more so that you tend to absorb everything you're experiencing at any given time to a magnitude that can lead you down dark paths. So having spiritual isolation, isolation that serves an internal healing purpose and that really resonates with you, might actually be something that you need to start giving some type of form and containment to your spiritual burdens and your spiritual experience and translating them into spiritual wisdom, enlightened wisdom. The 12th house is the last house of the zodiac wheel, so it is the house of the ultimate enlightenment and the ultimate ascension. But you are here on the planet Earth, so you're not meant to stay in a state of ascension. Really, what the 12th house governs is taking those areas of life, access to the subconscious, which most people don't have as much access to, and translating it so that way others can learn from it. There is a deep connection to karmic lessons here and helping others fulfill their karmic lessons by translating that innate, ancient, ascended wisdom that you have access to. But it's only through being willing to face the silence and actually face yourself, face the spiritual heaviness that you feel, the emotional heaviness, and realizing that that's your key to unlocking this wisdom that not only heals you and gives you purpose and fulfillment, but then bleeds outwards into everybody else as well. However, with that, you may actually fear losing yourself as well. You may fear losing your identity by merging with everybody, because Neptune, Pisces, and the 12th house, it is the house of dissolving boundaries. This is the energy of dissolving all boundaries. So part of you may want to merge with everything, but you are afraid of that because you are so afraid of losing yourself, and you already feel like you have so little control over what you've experienced and what you currently experience that it will cause you to reject doing anything that feels like merging and losing those boundaries into the collective. But really, again, what you're trying to do is give healthy containment to that wisdom and translate it to the collective. But this does not mean losing yourself or sacrificing yourself, sacrificing your boundaries. It's up to you to determine what those healthy boundaries are. But you can be this translator and this vessel that is healing and enlightening to others. So healing really begins to happen, and mastery of Saturn in the 12th begins to happen when you decide to face the unconscious with courage and curiosity. You realize that your solitude can be sacred. You stop running from your inner world. You develop a spiritual discipline that aligns with you, and you hold space for suffering without being consumed by it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave your Saturn house and sign down below, and let us know anything else we should know about your Saturn house and sign placement. I love to keep learning. I'm always a student of life, but I'm sure others would appreciate it too. Don't forget to also watch my Saturn sign video and the Saturn return video so you know so much more about Saturn and its important transits in this life. But until I see you in the next video, thank you so much again for being here. I'm always so grateful for you. Adios.